White flight attendant yells at black child 10 minutes later. She's fired in front of everyone. John F. Kennedy International Airport buzzed with the familiar energy of thousands of passengers weaving their way through security lines, duty-free shops, and gate lounges. It was early afternoon on a sweltering summer day in New York City. No matter how many times someone traveled, there was always that bit of anxious excitement that came with stepping into an airport terminal. The rush, the swirl of languages and accents, the promise of destinations near and far, a microcosm of the world. Among the throng of travelers was a small family that exuded warmth in their every interaction. Alexis Moore, a poised and determined mother, led her two children, 10-year-old Simone and 8-year-old Jordan, toward Gate B-24, where their flight to Los Angeles was scheduled to depart in just over an hour. While Simone could barely contain her excitement for the family trip to California, Jordan clutched a small plush airplane toy, a gift from their dad who was meeting them later. Both children were dressed comfortably in matching sweatshirts reading "Adventure Time." Their father, Malcolm Moore, a jazz musician touring on the West Coast, had invited them out to Los Angeles for a family mini-vacation between his gigs. Alexis, hoping to make the trip special, had arrived at the airport early. Her plan was to keep the flight smooth, well-organized, and full of pleasant surprises for her children. Little did she know fate had other plans. A single moment of cruelty from an unexpected source would launch them into a whirlwind of tension, confrontation, and an unforgettable conclusion that no bystander that day would ever forget. Just a few gates away, busy with final checks and preparations, flight attendant Belinda Hyde was having a morning that frayed her patience from the get-go. A tall, sharp-featured woman in her early 40s, Belinda prided herself on efficiency. Many fellow attendants found her demanding, though they also respected her detail-oriented approach to cabin service. Despite her excellent track record, there were rumors swirling that Belinda had a short temper, a hidden streak of prejudice, and a readiness to find fault with passengers who, in her words, weren't well behaved. With the flight scheduled to board in less than an hour, the stage was set for an encounter that would upend Belinda's carefully constructed sense of control, test the protective instincts of Alexis Moore, and spark a chain of events culminating in both heartbreak and an astonishing form of karmic justice. Little did everyone know, in less than 2 hours, the entire lounge of Gate B-24 would become witness to the swift downfall of a flight attendant who crossed a line that should never be crossed. Alexis balanced a small duffel bag over her shoulder as she guided Simone and Jordan to the Delta Airlines check-in counters. The line was unexpectedly short that afternoon. The children, enthusiastic about the trip, kept peppering their mother with questions. "Mum, are we going to see the Hollywood sign tomorrow?" Jordan asked, eyes gleaming. "Yes, baby," Alexis said with a smile. "And we'll go to the beach, too. Your dad's going to show us around. He said he has tickets for us to see a jazz showcase on Saturday night." Simone let out a quiet squeal. "Yes, I've never been to a real jazz club before. Is it fancy?" "Well, it's somewhere Dad said kids can go, so probably not too fancy," Alexis joked. "But get ready for some amazing music." Their conversation was cut short as they stepped up to the check-in counter. A polite Delta employee named Brian greeted them. He scanned their tickets and checked their baggage. Throughout the process, Brian beamed at the children, complimenting Simone's bright pink braids and Jordan's high-top sneakers. "You're all set," Brian said, handing back their boarding passes. "Looks like you've got an on-time departure for Los Angeles. Have a great trip, folks." With a quick word of thanks, Alexis guided the kids towards security. Everything was routine, even under the usual hustle of an international airport. Though the lines at security were a bit longer, the process was mostly smooth. They took off their shoes, placed their carry-on items in trays, and walked through scanners without incident. On the other side of security, Alexis led the children to a nearby cafe, hoping to feed them something light before the flight. She glanced at her watch. Boarding was set to start in 45 minutes. She felt relieved that they had ample time. Across the hall, at a bustling Starbucks, Flight attendant Belinda Hyde stood in a serpentine queue that tested her minimal patience. She glanced at her watch, knowing she needed to be at gate B24 soon. However, her morning shift had left her famished, and she needed coffee to keep her energy up. The line crawled forward. A traveller in front of her rummaged for exact change. Another next to her spilled coffee on the floor, causing a brief panic. Belinda let out a sigh that sounded more like a hiss. This chaotic environment only reminded her why she preferred order, cleanliness, and calm. She was about to spend several hours in a pressurized cabin with over 100 passengers, and the idea was already giving her a headache. By the time she finally got to the cashier, her expression was as cold as the iced latte she ordered. The barista forced a polite smile, used to handling impatient travelers. Belinda plucked her cup from the pickup counter and hurried off to gate B24. There, her fellow flight attendants, Marta and Rob, were already greeting early boarders with standard checklists at hand. Belinda sipped her latte and grimaced slightly, the taste reminding her that she had to keep a facade of politeness in front of the passengers. She had no idea that in less than an hour, that carefully constructed facade would come crashing down. After some light sandwiches and fruit smoothies, Alexis checked the overhead screens. Their flight, DL451 to Los Angeles, was on schedule. Passengers were slowly gathering near gate B24. Simone and Jordan chattered away about what movies they might watch on the plane. Alexis found 2 seats near the gate's windows, giving the kids a view of the airplanes. She then scrolled through her phone, checking messages from Malcolm. He had sent them encouraging voice notes. "Safe travels, can't wait to see you." Alexis could hear the soft clink of instruments in the background, indicating he was rehearsing. Meanwhile, just behind the gate desk's tall counter, Belinda was double-checking the passenger manifest. She pursed her lips upon seeing that the flight was fairly full in the economy section. She disliked large crowds, especially if they included families with young children. She often found that parents did not supervise their children enough for her liking. A certain rigidity had become her coping mechanism for stress, a place for everything and everything in its place. Her eyes scanned the passenger list for any special instructions. A wheelchair passenger, a diabetic needing extra attention, someone with a food allergy. She made mental notes. Then her gaze flicked over to the family section, lots of kids on board. She internally groaned. Though Belinda was widely known among her co-workers for her impeccable uniform, efficient service, and mastery of flight procedures, she also carried a reputation as a disciplinarian. Stories circulated among flight crews of her scolding parents if their children talked too loudly, or her refusing an older man an extra beverage because he had been slightly rude. So far, these had been whispered legends, minor incidents that never escalated to something that threatened her job. But, as many people on that day would soon realize, even a single hateful spark can ignite a wildfire of consequences. When the first boarding announcements began, Alexis gathered Simone and Jordan, making sure they had their backpacks and carry-on items. "Let's line up once they call our zone," Alexis instructed. "No need to rush." Simone and Jordan nodded dutifully, used to traveling rules. They kept themselves entertained by watching planes taxi outside. Soon, the gate agent announced early boarding for passengers needing extra assistance and families with small children. Alexis debated momentarily. Simone and Jordan were not toddlers, but they weren't exactly grown either. She decided to wait for their proper boarding zone, simply to avoid the bustle of the early boarding line. Finally, their group was called. As they approached the gate, Simone asked, "Do you think they'll have good snacks on this flight?" "If they have those cookies you like, you'll be in heaven," Alexis chuckled. They handed their boarding passes to the agent, a smiling young woman named Danielle. She scanned them, then motioned them on board. The corridor leading down to the aircraft was cool with air conditioning. The hum of engines outside roared faintly through the walls. Before stepping into the plane, Alexis noted the flight number displayed at the cabin entrance. Delta Airlines Flight 451, non-stop to Los Angeles. She smiled softly, anticipating a smooth journey. Inside the aircraft, the initial wave of passengers was already stowing their bags overhead. The typical commotion of boarding reigned supreme. Some rummaged in overhead bins for space, others gingerly carried coffee cups, and a few older passengers sought help from flight attendants. The smell of recirculated air, faint cleaning supplies, and the hint of fresh coffee from the galley greeted Alexis, Simone, and Jordan. Their assigned seats were in row 22, near the middle of the plane. Simone had the window seat, Jordan took the middle, and Alexis the aisle. She helped the kids put their backpacks underneath the seats in front of them. Jordan asked if he could keep his plush airplane in his lap. Alexis allowed it. He found it comforting. While they settled, a man in the row behind them lifted a suitcase overhead and inadvertently bumped Simone's seat. Alexis instinctively reached out to ensure her daughter was okay. Simone just gave a small startled glance, then calmed down. The man apologized, looking a bit flustered. Alexis assured him it was fine. Belinda, meanwhile, stood near the front of the cabin, greeting passengers with a perfunctory nod. Her crisp uniform was in perfect order: blue blazer, red scarf knotted at the neck, hair pulled into a tight bun. She scanned the faces of passengers as they passed. She often prided herself on quickly sizing up each traveller, as if anticipating which ones might cause trouble. A mother travelling alone with 2 kids. Possibly trouble, Belinda thought. But as Alexis and her children had already passed her earlier to reach row 22, she had only caught the tail end of them, not paying close attention. She was more concerned with a family of 5 who seemed to be juggling strollers and endless carry-ons. Once the overhead bins were reaching capacity and the line of boarding passengers dwindled, Belinda moved through the aisles, checking for seatbelts fastened, tray tables stowed, and seat backs upright. She forced a tight smile at anyone who made eye contact. She answered the occasional question about overhead bin space or flight time, but mostly she was on autopilot, reciting rote phrases in a detached tone. In row 22, Alexis reminded Simone and Jordan to buckle up. Jordan was fidgety, excited about the flight. Simone was content to stare out the window at the crew on the tarmac, preparing the luggage and fueling the plane. Alexis pulled out a book from her tote bag, Becoming by Michelle Obama. It was her attempt to keep her mind occupied during takeoff, knowing Jordan sometimes got anxious at that moment. "Mom, can I have gum for my ears?" Jordan asked. "Sure, sweetie," Alexis replied, digging into a small pouch and handing him a piece. Just then, Belinda approached, her eyes scanning the row with a practiced precision. She noticed that Jordan had a small plush airplane on his lap, and that Simone was leaning slightly on the window with one foot not fully flat. She did not see anything inherently wrong, but her expression hardened anyway, as though she expected to find a violation. "Seat belts on?" Belinda asked curtly, though the question was rhetorical as she could see them buckled. "Yes, we're all buckled," Alexis answered politely. "We're set." Belinda sniffed once, as though acknowledging the effort. Without a word, she moved on. It was a small, dismissive interaction, but Alexis felt a slight chill from it. She shrugged it off. Everyone had their own way of dealing with the stress of their job. She didn't think much more about it. But that was just the beginning of a tension neither Alexis nor her children could have anticipated. The boarding door closed. The usual announcements played over the PA system. One flight attendant demonstrated the use of seat belts, life vests, and oxygen masks, while another pointed to the nearest exits. Belinda stood near the front, skillfully showing how to secure the life vest, though her eyes seemed distant. She just wanted to get this flight over with. Moments later, the plane taxied away from the gate. Simone pressed her face against the window, enthralled by the ground crew in their fluorescent vests and the motion of nearby aircraft lining up for takeoff. Jordan clutched his plush airplane, repeatedly glancing at the seatback screen to figure out which movie to watch once they were airborne. The engines roared. The aircraft raced down the runway, and with a rush of force, they lifted off into the skies. As the plane ascended through scattered clouds, Jordan let out a small cheer, while Simone giggled. Alexis placed a calming hand on Jordan's shoulder, proud he wasn't as anxious as last time. Once the seatbelt sign chimed off, passengers began to shuffle in their seats, some leaning back to rest, others rummaging for headphones or magazines. Alexis pulled out her phone to switch it to airplane mode and noticed a missed call from Malcolm. She sighed, wishing she could speak to him, but it would have to wait until they landed in Los Angeles. Belinda emerged from the galley with a beverage cart, joined by Marta, her co-attendant. They made their way down the aisle, handing out small bags of peanuts, cookies or pretzels, along with a variety of drinks. When they reached row 22, Marta handled the interaction with Alexis and the children, while Belinda handled row 21. Marta was cheerful, asking the kids if they wanted apple juice or soda. Jordan asked for apple juice. Simone requested Sprite. Alexis opted for water. However, about 3 rows ahead, a passenger rang the call light. Belinda left Marta behind to handle the beverage cart, going to address the call. Upon returning, she observed a quick glimpse of Jordan raising his voice slightly. He was excitedly showing Simone something on his seatback screen. To Belinda, the child's voice felt like a jarring disruption, though in reality it was just typical kid excitement. She narrowed her eyes but said nothing yet. The moment passed, and Belinda continued distributing drinks. Tension was building, but it remained a faint undercurrent. An hour into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed slightly as some passengers tried to sleep or watch in-flight movies. Simone had begun watching a cartoon, while Jordan was enthralled by a documentary about airplanes, an odd but endearing choice for an 8-year-old. Alexis read her book, occasionally leaning over to check on the kids. All was well. Just your standard cross-country flight, albeit a long one. She wondered if they could nap for a bit and wake up closer to LA. Outside, the sky shifted from patches of clouds to bright sunshine. Suddenly, the seatbelt sign turned on, and an announcement crackled through. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're encountering some mild turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin." Sure enough, a light shudder ran through the airplane. Alexis felt Jordan grip her arm. She patted him reassuringly. "It's okay, buddy. It's just a little bump." Simone clicked her seatbelt tighter and resumed looking out the window. The turbulence was mild at first, a bit of rumbling that made the overhead lights flicker slightly. Then a sharper jolt came, causing the plane to dip. A collective gasp filled the cabin. Even Alexis's heart skipped a beat. Simone pressed her face against the window, partly out of fascination and partly nerves. Across the aisle, Belinda was strapping a seatbelt around the beverage cart, securing it near the galley. Her professional instincts took over. She repeated instructions for everyone to remain seated, her voice carrying a hint of sharpness. A few overhead bins popped open from the jolt, and Belinda quickly latched them shut. After a few tense minutes, the turbulence began to subside, and the flight smoothed out. However, one more minor jostle occurred, causing Jordan to let out a yelp of surprise. It wasn't that loud, but it was audible. Belinda, passing by at that moment, seemingly zeroed in on Jordan's outburst. She paused near row 22, her posture rigid. She stared at Jordan with an expression that suggested she was looking for a reason to chastise. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her tone falsely polite but laced with disapproval. Alexis answered calmly, "We're fine, thank you. Jordan just got startled by the turbulence." Belinda nodded curtly. Her eyes flicked to Jordan, who shrank back slightly under her gaze. Simone furrowed her brow. She could sense the hostility. Alexis caught it too, but tried to remain polite. With a tight smile, Belinda continued her walk down the aisle. Alexis exhaled, thinking the confrontation was over. She had no idea how wrong she was. The flight continued without significant incident for another hour. Simone dozed off while Jordan busied himself with a handheld game. Alexis scanned an in-flight magazine. Belinda and the other attendants made the occasional round. A few scattered attempts at conversation among passengers created a low hum in the cabin. Overall, it was the kind of lull common to long flights. Then Jordan's handheld game emitted a sudden burst of beeping noises. He had forgotten to plug in his headphones, and the game's volume was turned up. Alexis's head snapped up. "Jordan, turn that down," she whispered firmly. She didn't want to disturb neighboring passengers. Jordan quickly fumbled with the controls, pressing the volume button. It was only a few seconds of noise before he silenced it. But in that brief window, Belinda was passing on her routine check. Her head whipped around. Something in her snapped. She marched to row 22, her eyes fierce. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the relative quiet. "Is there a reason you're disturbing everyone around you with that noise?" Jordan's eyes went wide. He scrambled to shut off the game. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean to." Alexis stepped in, voice calm but insistent. "He's already turned it down. It was just a few seconds. We apologize if it disturbed anyone." Belinda's mouth tightened. There was no reason for her to linger, yet she did. Her eyes landed on Jordan's face with a critical stare, then on Alexis with something akin to contempt. It was an unspoken tension, as though she were sizing them up. Then she said quietly but distinctly, "This is why children need better supervision." Alexis's heart pounded. "I assure you he's well supervised." Before Alexis could say more, Belinda let out a small, disbelieving, She turned and strutted off. A few passengers nearby exchanged awkward glances. Some looked annoyed at Belinda's attitude. Others just turned up their headphones to avoid the drama. Alexis took a deep breath, anger simmering. She glanced at Jordan, who looked on the verge of tears, feeling singled out and embarrassed. Simone awoke from her light nap and frowned at the tension. "What happened?" she asked sleepily. "It's okay," Alexis said, smoothing Jordan's hair. "Just a misunderstanding." But the seeds of conflict had been sown, and they were about to sprout in a way no one could have predicted. About 30 minutes later, Belinda found herself dealing with a fussy passenger in row 16 who had spilled a soft drink. After cleaning up the mess, she was already in a foul mood. On her way back, she heard a small burst of laughter from Jordan and Simone in row 22. They had discovered an in-flight trivia game they could play together. Their giggles were genuine, kid-like, and not at all obnoxiously loud by any normal measure. But Belinda was in no mood for any childlike glee. She made a beeline for row 22, ignoring Marta's attempt to get her attention about another matter. Standing over them, with an almost menacing posture, she addressed the children directly, her voice low and cold. "I thought I told you to keep it down," she hissed. Alexis set her magazine aside, bracing herself to intervene. "Ma'am, they're allowed to talk. They're just kids enjoying a trivia game. They're not being disruptive." Belinda let out a sharp breath, as if Alexis were the last straw. She looked directly into Alexis's eyes, and then at the children in a way that made Alexis's stomach twist. There was a moment of charged silence. Other passengers in nearby rows sensed the tension and glanced over. And then it happened, words so poisonous they stunned everyone. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you," Belinda muttered, her voice barely above a whisper, but loud enough to carry. "I've had enough of your kind acting like you own the place." The hush that fell over that section of the cabin was deafening. Alexis's breath caught in her throat. Did she really just say that? Simone's and Jordan's eyes were huge, their confusion blending with fear. They understood the meaning behind those words. One passenger nearby gasped. Another exclaimed under his breath, "Oh my God!" A few others stared in shock, while some further away tried to figure out what was happening. Alexis stood up in the aisle, her posture trembling with anger. She spoke in a measured tone that betrayed her outrage. "What did you just say? My children haven't done anything wrong." Belinda crossed her arms, doubling down. "They're disruptive, and you're letting them be. This is my cabin, and we have rules." "This has nothing to do with rules." Alexis's voice rose, tears threatening to appear at the corners of her eyes. "You insulted us. You used racist language." That last word, racist, seemed to echo in the surrounding seats. Several passengers bristled, hearts pounding, as the reality of what they had just witnessed sank in. Belinda's expression flickered with momentary panic. She realized she had spoken too loudly and that others had heard. But instead of apologizing, she doubled down again. "I'm not racist. Don't you dare call me that. If you people would just behave." A chorus of shocked voices erupted around them. "How dare you say that? She just did it again. That's unacceptable." Passengers began fumbling for phones, outraged by the flight attendant's behavior. Alexis's face was pale, though her anger flared red-hot. She looked down at Jordan, tears streaming silently down the boy's cheeks. Simone looked as though she might cry too, but she was gripping her mother's arm, defiance simmering. In the midst of chaos, Alexis demanded, "I want your name. I'm reporting you to the airline right now." Belinda snorted, "I don't have to—" Suddenly, another flight attendant, Marta, pushed her way to the scene, alerted by the uproar. "What's going on here?" she asked breathlessly, seeing the tension and the phone cameras recording. Belinda tried to speak first, but Alexis's voice broke through. "This flight attendant just insulted my children, and me used racist language, called us you people, and said, 'You're kind.' This is unacceptable." Marta's eyes widened in alarm. She had known Belinda for a while, had even suspected she harbored prejudices, but she never imagined it would come out like this. "Belinda, what in the world?" Belinda stammered. Her kids were being disruptive." A passenger behind them, an older Latina woman who had overheard the comments, shook her head vehemently. "That's not what I heard, and even if they were being loud, there's no excuse for what you said." The cabin was now thick with tension. People leaned into aisles or over seats to see what was unfolding. Some recorded on their phones, capturing every moment. Others just stared, appalled. At that moment, the cockpit door opened slightly, and the captain, a silver-haired man with a calm demeanor, stepped out, alerted by the commotion. He quickly took stock of the situation. "What's going on here?" Alexis turned to him, raw emotion in her voice. "Your flight attendant," she just yelled at my children, "used racist language, insulted us. It's all on camera." Belinda stared at the captain, her face paling. She tried to gather herself. "Sir, these passengers—" But the captain held up a hand. "I need you to step to the front now." His voice was controlled, but there was a firm edge to it that brooked no debate. Belinda gave Alexis and her children a final look of contempt before walking down the aisle to the front of the plane, guided by Marta and the captain. The hush that remained in her wake was charged with outrage and pain. Alexis sank back into her seat, holding Simone and Jordan close, as if to shield them from further harm. And it was at that precise moment, 10 minutes from the outburst, that the wheels of justice and karma began to turn. Everyone in the cabin was about to witness a swift, extraordinary reckoning. The plane was still cruising at 35,000 feet when the captain escorted Belinda to the galley at the front. Marta was behind them, eyes darting nervously. The passengers near rows 1 and 2 craned their necks to see the confrontation. In hushed, urgent tones, the captain demanded an explanation. Belinda tried to twist the narrative, claiming the children were causing disturbances, but Marta, biting her lip, finally spoke up. "That's not what happened, and she used racist language in front of multiple passengers." The captain's face hardened. He rubbed his temples as if nursing a headache. The quiet fury in his eyes was evident. "We do not tolerate that. Period." Belinda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She realized she was cornered. I was under stress. The flight's been—" "No," the captain interrupted. "That is no excuse. This airline has strict guidelines on dealing with passengers, and on top of that, zero tolerance for racism or harassment." "But sir—" "Stop. Enough." His voice was calm, but in the finality of that word lay Belinda's doom. "We'll make an emergency phone call to the ground once we have a secure connection. You will not be performing duties for the rest of this flight." Belinda's eyes widened in horror. "You can't be serious." "I am very serious. In fact, you might as well start packing any personal items you have on board." He took a breath, then turned to Marta, who looked stunned. "Marta, I'm placing you in charge of the cabin for the remainder of the flight." Marta nodded. She had never seen anything like this happen mid-flight, but she also knew it was the right call. Then the captain made an announcement that would reverberate throughout the entire cabin. He stepped into the aisle, used the intercom, and spoke clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've had a serious incident involving one of our flight attendants who behaved inappropriately and used offensive language toward a passenger and her children. I want to assure you that Delta Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy regarding any form of discrimination or harassment. Effective immediately, that flight attendant has been relieved of her duties for the rest of this flight. On behalf of the entire airline crew, I sincerely apologize to the affected passengers and to everyone on board for this unacceptable conduct." The cabin exploded into a mix of applause, murmurs, and gasps of disbelief. Many whipped their heads toward row 22, where Alexis and her children sat. Some passengers gave them sympathetic looks. A few even applauded, in a gesture of solidarity for the swift action. Others just stared in shock at the captain's blunt announcement. In the front galley, Belinda's face turned beet red. She had never been so publicly humiliated in her entire career. Furious tears pricked at her eyes. The captain turned to her one last time. "You will remain seated in the jump seat at the front, away from passengers, until we land at LAX. We'll deal with the formal paperwork and disciplinary action upon arrival." Belinda opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. She had effectively been fired, or at the very least, suspended on the spot, in front of everyone. For a long moment she stood there, stunned into silence, pinned by the eyes of passengers in the first rows and those who craned their necks from further down. Then she slumped into the jump seat, her entire body trembling with rage, shame, and the realization that she had destroyed her career in a single outburst. When the captain's announcement finished, the air was thick with conversation. A ripple effect moved through the cabin as people tried to process what they had just heard. A flight attendant being fired mid-flight was unheard of, especially for something as serious as racism. Marta, the newly in-charge cabin crew member, immediately went to row 22. She knelt beside Alexis's seat, face anguished. "Mom, I am so sorry for what happened. Are you and your children okay?" Alexis, tears lining her eyes, nodded. She had an arm around Simone and Jordan, both of whom were shaken. "We're all right, I'm so hurt that it happened in the first place." Passengers around them chimed in with support. One older gentleman across the aisle said, "That was disgraceful what she said to you. I'm glad the captain did the right thing." A younger woman behind them offered tissues. "I recorded everything on my phone if you need evidence," she told Alexis, who nodded appreciatively. Marta pursed her lips. "We have an incident form that we'd like you to fill out, and corporate will definitely contact you for a formal apology. We might also land with some airline management on standby to speak with you." Alexis's voice shook. "I appreciate that. My main concern is that my children, they shouldn't have to go through something like this." Jordan, eyes full of tears, whispered, "Mom, are we in trouble?" "No, baby," Alexis whispered back fiercely. "You did nothing wrong." Simone pressed her face into Alexis's shoulder. "I just want to get to Dad." Marta's face reflected compassion. "We'll do our best to make you comfortable for the rest of the flight. If you need anything at all, please let me or any of the other attendants know. I'm so sorry." With that, Marta gently returned to her duties, leaving Alexis and her children trying to process what had happened. Nearby passengers expressed their condolences, anger, and shock. Some patted Alexis on the shoulder in a gesture of comfort. From the front of the aircraft, Belinda sat strapped in the jump seat, arms folded, tears occasionally slipping down her cheeks. She stared straight ahead, ignoring the stares of passengers who passed by to use the restroom or stretch their legs. Her mind swirled with regret, Anger at herself, anger at the situation, and an underlying sense of disbelief. She knew, deep down, that she might never work in the airline industry again. The flight still had over 3 hours until landing, and in that span of time, the tension slowly diffused. People returned to their seats. The in-flight movies continued playing, and the hum of the engines provided a steady backdrop. Yet the aura of the cabin had changed. Everyone was on edge, more alert than before. Alexis tried to soothe Jordan, encouraging him to watch his documentary again or play a silent game on his device. Simone wanted nothing but to listen to music on low volume through her headphones. Meanwhile, Alexis couldn't help but replay the moment in her mind. She had always been prepared to stand up for her children in any situation, but she never imagined a flight attendant, a representative of an international airline, would spew such hateful words in the middle of a flight. In her heart, anger smoldered, but she also felt a surge of relief. They had not been ignored. People had witnessed what happened, and the airline had taken swift action. That was something, at least. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles International Airport, the captain came on the intercom once again, instructing everyone to buckle up and prepare for landing. The cabin lights brightened slightly. Flight attendants, led by Marta, roamed the aisle, ensuring seats were upright and trays stowed. Belinda remained in the jump seat, silent, her face streaked with tears that had dried in patches. She stared vacantly at the wall. The rest of the crew maintained a subtle distance, unwilling to speak with her. Alexis felt her stomach twist with the usual landing jitters, plus the emotional weight of the incident. She held Jordan's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Simone stared out the window, seeing the city sprawl beneath them. Los Angeles shimmered in the late afternoon sun. The wheels touched down with a bump. Passengers exhaled collectively, some relieved to finally be on solid ground after such an eventful flight. The taxi to the gate felt longer than usual. When the plane parked at the terminal, the seatbelt sign turned off, and everyone began gathering their belongings. But no one was prepared for the scene that unfolded as soon as the main cabin door opened. 2 uniformed Delta Airlines supervisors, 1 man, 1 woman, stepped on board, followed by 2 airport security officers. Their gazes scanned the cabin, quickly settling on Belinda in the forward jump seat. Marta approached them, speaking in low tones. Then one of the supervisors nodded grimly and gestured for Belinda to stand. "Belinda Hyde?" he asked. Belinda rose slowly, tears threatening again. She pulled her carry-on from a storage compartment in the galley. The female supervisor's expression was resolute, yet sympathetic. "We'll need you to come with us. We've received the captain's report and statements from multiple passengers. This is a serious matter." Belinda opened her mouth, searching for words of defense, but none came. She followed the supervisors off the plane, flanked by the security officers. Passengers were still seated in silent, stunned witness. It was as if an invisible spotlight had highlighted her final walk of shame. Next, the male supervisor stepped back onto the aircraft and, in front of the disembarking passengers, made a brief statement. "To all passengers aboard Delta Flight 451, we sincerely apologize for the conduct you experienced. Our company does not condone discrimination or harassment in any form, and we will be taking immediate disciplinary action in accordance with our policies. We appreciate your cooperation and understanding." There was scattered clapping from some passengers. Others sighed in relief. A few took out their phones, capturing the moment. Alexis felt a strange sense of closure, though the knot in her stomach remained. She squeezed Simone's and Jordan's hands, motioning them to gather their backpacks. As they filed out, other passengers paused to extend words of comfort. A young couple from across the aisle said, "We're really sorry you had to go through that." An older gentleman added, "Stay strong. That was so wrong of her." Alexis thanked them quietly, her mind juggling relief, exhaustion, and lingering anger. She led the children off the plane, where another Delta representative was waiting. "Mrs. Moore?" the representative asked, stepping forward. She introduced herself as Cheryl, a customer relations manager for Delta at LAX. "I'm here to guide you through next steps and offer any assistance." Alexis offered a tight nod. I appreciate that. My husband is waiting outside baggage claim. Let's collect your luggage and then, if you're willing, we'd like you to visit our office to complete any necessary incident reports, Cheryl explained. We'll make sure you have a comfortable place to rest, and we can also arrange transportation if needed. Alexis glanced at her children. Both looked tired and emotionally drained. She wanted to reunite with Malcolm as soon as possible. Still, she recognized the importance of documenting everything. All right. Let's do that as quickly as we can. Cheryl nodded sympathetically. Of course, and please know we take this very seriously. The captain was in immediate contact with our corporate offices. Your family has our deepest apologies. And thus they exited the jet bridge into the hustle of Los Angeles International Airport, flanked by other weary passengers. The bright terminal lights felt surreal after the emotional stress they had just endured. Cameras flashed as a few local journalists or bystanders took pictures, having heard a rumor of an incident on board. Airport gossip traveled fast. After the brief visit to the Delta office near the arrivals area, Alexis and the children were finally escorted to the main terminal. There, behind a crowd near baggage claim, stood Malcolm Moore, tall and confident in a casual blazer, scanning for his family. The moment he saw them, he rushed forward, concern etched across his face. "Lex, are you all right?" he asked, pulling her into a hug. Jordan and Simone clung to him. "I tried calling. Then I heard something happened on your flight." Tears welled in Alexis's eyes as she explained the incident in hushed tones. Malcolm's jaw clenched at the details. He held his children close, anger and protectiveness flooding him. "What? She said that to you guys?" Simone nodded, her voice trembling. "She was so mean, Dad." Jordan just buried his face in Malcolm's side, relief washing over him now that he felt the safety of his father's presence. Malcolm pressed a kiss to each of his children's foreheads. "We're going to make sure that flight attendant never does that again to anyone." He turned to Alexis, his gaze fierce and tender all at once. "You did the right thing by standing up to her." Cheryl, the Delta representative, stood quietly to the side, giving them space. After a few moments, she gently cleared her throat. "Mr. Moore, I also want to extend our apologies from Delta. We have incident forms, statements, and plenty of documentation from witnesses. We'll expedite the investigation." Malcolm nodded curtly. "Thank you. We appreciate that this was handled quickly, but the damage—" He looked sadly at Jordan and Simone. "We'll need time to process." Cheryl's shoulders slumped. "I understand. Please accept these accommodation vouchers as well upgraded seats if you ever choose to fly with us again, and we're providing a hotel stay for tonight if you need it." She handed a small envelope to Alexis. "It's the least we can do." Alexis managed a soft smile. "We already have a hotel booked, but thank you. I hope your airline continues to address situations like this swiftly. This should never happen to anyone." Cheryl nodded, looking deeply embarrassed on behalf of her company. "Agreed. We'll also ensure corporate follows up with you directly." With that, the family walked away from the baggage claim, luggage in tow, heading into the warm Los Angeles evening. Outside, a swirl of color from neon signs and the hum of traffic filled the air. Alexis inhaled, trying to let go of the tension. This was supposed to be a vacation, a fun family trip. Now it was overshadowed by a hateful moment that could have left them deeply wounded. But as they stepped into a waiting rideshare vehicle, Simone and Jordan already seemed calmer, more at ease with their father's reassurance and their mother's steadfast presence. Malcolm gently rubbed Alexis's shoulder. "We'll turn this around," he promised. "We'll spend time together, have fun, and not let that woman's ugliness overshadow our family." Alexis exhaled. "Yes, we will. Definitely." Back at the airport in a small HR office tucked away from public view, Belinda Hyde sat opposite two stern-faced airline supervisors. Her eyes were hollow, her cheeks tear-streaked. The female supervisor spoke in a calm, measured tone. We've reviewed statements from multiple passengers, as well as your captain and fellow flight attendants. We also have at least 2 video recordings capturing your words." Belinda stared at the table, saying nothing. The supervisor continued, "Your language toward that family, specifically referencing you people and your kind, constitutes racial harassment. This is grounds for immediate termination under our policy." Belinda lifted her gaze, tears brimming again. "I was stressed. I didn't mean—" "It doesn't matter what you meant," the male supervisor interjected. "Your words were clear. You've left us no choice. You are officially terminated from Delta Airlines, effective immediately. You will not be permitted on any further flights as an employee, and your benefits, including flight privileges, are revoked." Pain flared across Belinda's face. She pressed her lips together, a sob threatening to escape. The supervisors remained unmoved. They had seen enough hostility in the statements. This was a clean-cut case. "Please hand over your company ID, uniform badges, and any airline property you have," the female supervisor added. "Security will escort you off the premises." Belinda complied numbly, removing her ID lanyard, rummaging through her flight bag for airline documents, and placing them on the table. She felt hollowed out, her years of service undone by a moment of unleashed hatred. Yet it was a hatred she had nurtured privately for so long. Now it had cost her everything: her job, her reputation, her ability to ever work in a customer-facing role again. As she was escorted through the terminal in plain clothes, having changed out of her uniform in the HR office, she felt stares from employees who had heard the rumor. Some who had once respected her recognized her face, whispering among themselves. Belinda lowered her gaze, shame burning her cheeks. Hard karma had arrived, swift and merciless. The illusions she'd held about her own superiority were stripped away, leaving her exposed in the harsh fluorescent lights of the terminal. Meanwhile, at a boutique hotel in Santa Monica, Malcolm guided his family to a spacious suite overlooking the ocean. The shimmering sunset cast warm oranges and pinks across the horizon. The children, despite the day's emotional toll, gazed at the view in awe. Alexis set down the luggage and let her shoulders relax for the first time in hours. Malcolm wrapped her in a gentle hug from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "We're here now," he whispered. "Together." Alexis leaned into him, exhaling a breath she felt like she'd been holding since New York. "Thank you." Jordan and Simone ran to the windows, pressing their hands against the glass. Their youthful excitement about the beach below temporarily overshadowed their harrowing day. "We can go down to the beach tomorrow, right?" Simone asked, turning back to her parents with hopeful eyes. "Absolutely," Alexis said, trying to inject brightness into her tone. "We're going to have a good time. That's a promise." Jordan piped up. "And the jazz show is the day after, right, Dad?" "That's right," Malcolm said, smiling. "I'm playing a set at a family-friendly lounge. You'll get to see me jam on stage." Jordan grinned. Simone flashed a shy smile. It was as though each new plan for fun and adventure chipped away at the negativity that had clouded their journey. As the evening wore on, Alexis stepped out onto the balcony alone for a moment, letting the Pacific breeze wash over her. She reflected on the day's events, the hateful words, the swift justice, the flight attendant's meltdown, and the outpouring of support from other passengers. Her phone buzzed with messages and missed calls, presumably from friends and family who had seen viral posts about the incident. She knew it might become a trending news item. She took a moment to center herself, remembering that while it was traumatizing, it also validated the struggle people of color too often face in everyday life. Inside, Simone and Jordan laughed with their father as he told them goofy stories about backstage happenings at his jazz gigs. Their giggles brought a tear to Alexis's eye this time, a tear of gratitude that her children were resilient, that they could still find joy. She whispered to herself, "We'll be all right." The next few days passed in a flurry of family activities. They visited the Santa Monica Pier, ate ice cream cones under the California sun, and even took a quick drive to see the Hollywood sign. At night, they attended Malcolm's jazz performance. Simone and Jordan clapped enthusiastically when their father took a solo. Alexis felt her heart glow as she watched them cheer, proud and confident. Occasionally, the day of the flight incident came back to the forefront of their minds. A few local journalists reached out for interviews. Alexis decided to speak briefly with one reporter, emphasizing that what mattered most was that no one should have to experience hateful language, especially not children, and that swift accountability was crucial. Meanwhile, Alexis continued to receive calls from Delta's customer relations, offering further apologies, compensation, and reassurance that Belinda would never work for the airline again. Sitting together on their last night in Los Angeles, the Moore family gathered on the hotel balcony to watch the sun dip below the horizon one final time before their return to New York. Malcolm had his arm around Alexis, and Jordan leaned against his father, fiddling with his plush airplane. Simone sat cross-legged, phone in hand, taking pictures of the sunset. Alexis, feeling the warmth of their unity, decided to address what happened in a way that would help her children process it. "Kids," she began softly, "I know what happened on the plane was scary and hurtful. Sometimes people say awful things because of prejudice or hate. It's not right, and it's not fair." Simone nodded, her eyes reflecting a mature understanding. "She said we didn't follow the rules, but we did. It was just because we're black, right?" Alexis swallowed. "Yes, baby. That's what racism can look like. People make unfair assumptions or treat us badly just because of our skin color." Jordan looked up at them. But the captain was on our side. Malcolm gave a gentle squeeze to Jordan's shoulder. Yes, he was. There are good people out there who will do the right thing when they see injustice, and that's important to remember. Simone wrapped an arm around her mother. "I'm glad you stood up for us, Mom." Alexis pressed a kiss to Simone's forehead. "Always. I'll always stand up for you, and you should stand up for yourselves too. Don't ever let anyone make you feel less than you are." They lapsed into companionable silence. The ocean waves provided a soothing soundtrack, a reminder that the world held beauty despite its harsh moments. Malcolm's phone buzzed, another friend checking in to see if they were all right. He sent a quick, "all good thanks" text and turned his phone face down. Tonight was about family, about healing, about reaffirming love in the face of hate. As dusk turned to twilight, they retreated indoors, smiling over shared memories of the trip. The flight attendant's hateful words were not forgotten, but they had lost their power. The Moore family had chosen unity, courage, and joy over bitterness. And in the end, that choice shone brighter than any darkness a single person could conjure. Weeks later, back in New York, Alexis scrolled through her phone, reading an email from Delta Airlines' corporate office. It was a formal apology, detailing the steps the airline had taken: Belinda Hyde's termination, internal sensitivity training for staff, and a plan to review how complaints were handled on board. The airline also offered a statement of gratitude to passengers who intervened or recorded the incident, ensuring that accountability was not overlooked. A sense of closure settled over Alexis. She thought about how quickly life could pivot from an ordinary family trip to a flashpoint of conflict. And yet, from that conflict, rose a moment of communal solidarity, passengers who refused to stay silent, a captain who took immediate action, and an airline that, at least in this instance, backed up its zero-tolerance policy with real consequences. In a modest apartment in Queens, Belinda Hyde awoke every morning to the staggering reality of unemployment. In her circle of acquaintances, word spread about the reason for her firing. Old co-workers distanced themselves from her, unwilling to associate with someone who'd caused such a high-profile scandal. Potential employers hesitated to hire a flight attendant fired for racial harassment, especially since the story made local news. Hard karma had struck, and it continued to echo. And though she tried to rationalize her actions, at times blaming stress, other times insisting she was provoked, Deep down she wrestled with the knowledge that her words had been hateful. She'd undone her entire career in mere seconds. As for the Moore family, they carried on with life's usual rhythms: school for Simone and Jordan, gigs for Malcolm and Alexis, balancing work and home. Friends often asked if the children had recovered from the shock. The truth was, children are resilient. Jordan still had anxious moments on planes, but each time he remembered how his mother and father fought for him. Simone held her head high whenever the topic arose among her peers. Their next flight, months later, was to visit grandparents in Atlanta. This time the flight was calm, the attendants were kind, and the children's laughter filled the cabin without reproach. Alexis realized that while the scars from that day would never fully vanish, they had also grown stronger as a family. Their sense of empowerment was a testament that hateful words could not break them. In the end, the flight attendant had yelled at a black child, yes, but 10 minutes later she was fired in front of everyone. That moment, captured on phones and immortalized in testimonies, stood as a small but potent example that sometimes justice can be swift and decisive. Hateful people might appear in the most unexpected places, even at 35,000 feet in the air, but so can allies, and so can immediate consequences. And for Alexis, Simone, Jordan and Malcolm, life went on, colored by hope, love, and the knowledge that standing up against racism is not just a duty, but a courageous affirmation of one's own dignity.